Picture this. You walk into your workplace Christmas party, expecting colleagues to welcome you with smiles. Instead, you're met with sneering faces and deliberate exclusion. They think you're nobody. They think you're powerless. What they don't know is that you own everything they depend on: their jobs, their building, even their lawyer. Sometimes the best revenge isn't getting mad. It's watching them destroy themselves while you hold all the cards. I'd love to know which corner of the globe you're watching from. And if this story speaks to you, make sure to subscribe. Tomorrow's video is one you absolutely can't miss. Vanessa Mitchell adjusted her simple black dress as she stepped out of her modest Honda Civic in the parking lot of the prestigious Hartwell & Associates law firm. The December air bit at her cheeks, but not as much as the anticipation of what awaited her inside. She had been working as a paralegal at the firm for 8 months, and tonight was their annual holiday celebration, an event she'd been both dreading and planning for in equal measure. The building towered above her, its glass facade reflecting the city lights of downtown Phoenix. Most people saw it as an imposing symbol of legal power and prestige. Vanessa saw it differently. She saw it as hers. Walking through the marble lobby, she could hear laughter and music drifting down from the executive floor. Her heels clicked against the polished stone as she made her way to the elevator, her employee badge swaying slightly from the lanyard around her neck. To anyone watching, she looked like any other mid-level employee heading to a company party. That was exactly the impression she wanted to maintain. The elevator doors opened to reveal the firm's main conference room transformed into a winter wonderland. White lights draped from the ceiling, elegant centerpieces adorned every table, and a full bar had been set up in the corner. Partners mingled with associates, paralegals chatted with secretaries, and everyone seemed to be having a wonderful time. Everyone except the group that noticed Vanessa's arrival. Sarah Brennan, the firm's head paralegal, was the first to spot her. Sarah had made Vanessa's life miserable from day one, constantly undermining her work and spreading gossip about her background. Tonight, Sarah wore a designer cocktail dress that probably cost more than Vanessa's monthly salary, and her smile was as fake as her platinum blonde highlights. "Oh, look, Mitchell decided to show up," Sarah announced, loudly enough for her circle of friends to hear. The group included Jennifer Walsh from accounting, Marcus Torres from the mailroom, and Rebecca Stone, another paralegal who followed Sarah's lead in everything. Vanessa approached the group with a genuine smile, hoping to blend in and enjoy the evening. "Hi, everyone. The decorations look amazing. Did the events committee organize all this?" Sarah's laugh was sharp and dismissive. "The events committee? Oh, honey, this was planned by people who actually matter around here, people with real connections and influence." Jennifer Walsh, emboldened by Sarah's cruelty, chimed in. "I heard you used to work at some tiny strip mall law office before coming here. Must be quite the adjustment, working with actual professionals." The comment stung, but Vanessa maintained her composure. It was true that her previous job had been at a small family law practice, but that experience had been invaluable in ways these people couldn't imagine. She had learned the business from the ground up, understanding not just the legal work, but the financial and operational sides that most paralegals never encountered. Marcus Torres, usually quiet and respectful during work hours, seemed to gain confidence from the group's mean-spirited energy. "Yeah, and I noticed you drive that old Honda. Most people here at least have something decent. Kind of embarrassing for the firm's image, don't you think?" Rebecca Stone giggled at Marcus's comment. Maybe she's saving up for something better, though on a paralegal salary, that might take a while. The group erupted in laughter, their voices carrying across the room and drawing curious glances from other party guests. Vanessa felt her cheeks burn, not from embarrassment, but from controlled anger. She had endured months of this treatment, always professional, always taking the high road. Tonight felt different, though. Tonight felt like an ending. "You know what?" Sarah continued, her voice dripping with false concern. "Maybe you'd be more comfortable at one of the smaller holiday parties. I heard the copy center is having their own little gathering next week. Might be more your speed." The exclusion was deliberate and cruel. They were making it clear that she didn't belong, that she wasn't welcome in their circle, that she was beneath them in every way that mattered. What made it worse was how much they were enjoying it. Their grins weren't just dismissive, they were genuinely malicious, taking pleasure in making her feel small and unwanted. Other employees began to notice the commotion. Some looked uncomfortable with the obvious bullying, while others seemed entertained by the drama. Nobody stepped in to defend Vanessa or redirect the conversation. She was on her own, just as she had been for the past 8 months. "I think I'll stay," Vanessa said quietly, her voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through her veins. "I have just as much right to be here as anyone else." Sarah's eyebrows raised in mock surprise. "Oh, do you know? That's interesting." See, the thing is, this party is really for people who contribute something meaningful to the firm, people who bring value, people who have earned their place here. The group nodded in agreement, their faces showing varying degrees of smugness and cruelty. They were feeding off each other's energy, each comment becoming bolder and more hurtful than the last. "What exactly do you contribute, Mitchell?" Jennifer asked with false curiosity. "I mean, besides filing papers and making coffee runs, anyone can do that kind of work." Vanessa looked around the room, taking in the faces of her tormentors and the other employees who were now openly watching the confrontation. Some looked uncomfortable, others seemed entertained, but none were willing to intervene. She thought about all the nights she had worked late, all the cases she had researched thoroughly, all the clients she had helped navigate difficult legal situations. Her work spoke for itself, but clearly that didn't matter to this crowd. "I do my job well," she replied simply. "Your job?" repeated Sarah with a laugh. "Right. Well, here's the thing, sweetie. Some people have careers, and some people just have jobs. Some people build something lasting, and some people are just temporary." The word temporary hung in the air like a threat. Sarah's implication was clear. Vanessa's position at the firm was precarious, and she should remember her place if she wanted to keep it. Marcus leaned forward conspiratorially. "I heard Patterson and Williams are looking for paralegals. Might be a better fit for someone with your background." Patterson and Williams was another deliberate insult, implying that Vanessa wasn't qualified for the prestigious work at Hartwell and Associates.
The group's laughter grew louder, and more people began to gather around, drawn by the spectacle. Vanessa realized that this wasn't just casual workplace bullying. This was a public humiliation designed to put her in her place and establish the social hierarchy within the firm. What her tormentors didn't know was that Vanessa had been planning for this moment for months. Not this exact scenario, but the inevitable confrontation that would force her to reveal who she really was. She had hoped it might happen on her own terms, but sometimes life had other plans. As she stood there, surrounded by people who thought they held all the power, Vanessa made a decision. The charade had gone on long enough. These people had shown their true colors, and now it was time to show them hers. But not yet, not here, in front of everyone. She would let them have their moment of triumph, let them believe they had won. Because the sweeter the victory they thought they had achieved, the more devastating their fall would be when the truth finally came to light. "You know what?" Vanessa said with a small smile. "You're probably right. I should know my place." The group exchanged satisfied glances, clearly pleased with what they interpreted as her submission. Sarah's grin widened, and she patted Vanessa's shoulder in a gesture that was meant to appear kind but felt deeply condescending. "See, that wasn't so hard. Just remember, we all have our roles to play here. Some of us are leaders, and some of us are, well, followers." As the group dispersed, still chuckling about their successful intimidation, Vanessa remained standing in the same spot. She watched them walk away, their heads held high, their confidence absolute. They had no idea that they had just sealed their own fate. Tomorrow, everything will change. But tonight, she would let them enjoy their perceived victory. After all, it would be the last one they ever had at her expense. The next morning arrived gray and cold, matching Vanessa's mood as she sat in her downtown Phoenix apartment, sipping coffee and staring out at the city skyline. Her modest one-bedroom place was a stark contrast to the luxury condos many of her colleagues lived in, but it served her purposes perfectly. Everything about her current life was carefully constructed to maintain an image that served her larger plan. Her phone buzzed with a text from her assistant, Diana Carver, who worked at her private investment firm across town. Board meeting moved to 2 p.m. Henderson wants to discuss the Hartwell acquisition timeline. Vanessa smiled grimly. James Henderson was her business partner and the only person who knew her true identity. Together, they had built Apex Capital Management into one of the Southwest's most successful investment firms, specializing in commercial real estate and corporate acquisitions. While Vanessa played the role of struggling paralegal, she was actually worth over $40 million and controlled a portfolio that included some of Phoenix's most valuable properties. The Hartwell and Associates building was just one piece of that portfolio, purchased through a shell company 6 months before Vanessa took the paralegal job. The law firm's partners had no idea their rent payments were going directly into her accounts. At 9 a.m. sharp, Vanessa walked into the Hartwell offices wearing the same conservative outfit she wore every day, a simple blouse, modest skirt, and flats that had seen better days. She had learned that people saw what they expected to see, and her colleagues expected to see someone struggling financially. Sarah Brennan was already at her desk, surrounded by the same group from the night before. They were clearly still riding high from their performance at the party, whiskering and giggling like schoolchildren who had successfully pulled off a prank.
A lot of love and effort went into bringing this story to life. If you're enjoying it, we'd be so grateful if you'd subscribe to our channel. Now, back to where we left off. "Morning, Mitchell," Sarah called out in a sing-song voice. "Hope you slept well after our little chat last night." Jennifer Walsh looked up from her computer. "Did you give any thought to what we discussed? About maybe finding a better fit elsewhere?" Vanessa set her purse down at her small desk in the corner. "Actually, I did think about it, and I've decided to stay. I like it here." The response clearly wasn't what they expected. Sarah's smile faltered slightly, and Rebecca Stone exchanged a confused glance with Marcus Torres. "Well," Sarah said, recovering her composure, "that's certainly your choice. Though I should mention that Mr. Hartwell asked me to handle the Peterson case files you've been working on. Apparently, there were some concerns about the quality of your research." This was a lie, and they both knew it. Vanessa had spent weeks on the Peterson case, a complex corporate merger that required extensive due diligence. Her work had been flawless, but Sarah was trying to undermine her professionally now that personal humiliation hadn't driven her away. "I'll need those files by noon," Sarah continued, "and make sure everything is properly organized. We can't afford any mistakes when real professionals take over." The insult was deliberate and public. Other paralegals and junior associates were listening, and Sarah wanted everyone to know that Vanessa was being demoted and marginalized. It was a classic workplace power play designed to isolate her and make her position untenable. "Of course," Vanessa replied calmly, "I'll have everything ready." As the morning progressed, the harassment intensified. Jennifer Walsh made several snide comments about Vanessa's clothes and appearance. Marcus Torres accidentally spilled coffee near her desk, forcing her to clean it up while he watched with amusement. Rebecca Stone began openly discussing job openings at other firms, making sure Vanessa could hear every word. But the most damaging attack came from an unexpected source. David Kim, one of the junior associates who had always been professional with Vanessa, approached her desk around 11 a.m. with a stack of files. "Mitchell, I need these files and organized by the end of day," he said curtly, "and make sure the copies are clean. The last batch you did for me had smudges." This was another fabrication. Vanessa's filing was meticulous, and she had never turned in substandard work. That David had clearly been influenced by the campaign against her, possibly promised advancement if he joined in the harassment. "Also," David added, loud enough for nearby colleagues to hear, "I heard you've been having some performance issues. Maybe it would help if you took some night classes or something, improve your skills." The suggestion that she needed remedial education was particularly galling, given that Vanessa held an MBA from Stanford and a law degree from Northwestern.
But her fake resume only showed a community college certificate, so the insult appeared justified to anyone listening. By lunchtime, word had spread throughout the office that Vanessa Mitchell was being pushed out. Partners whispered in hallways, associates avoided making eye contact, and even the receptionist treated her with cool professionalism instead of her usual warmth. Sarah Brennan was clearly orchestrating the campaign, building momentum for what she hoped would be Vanessa's resignation or termination. She had turned workplace bullying into an art form, using professional criticism to mask personal cruelty. Around 1 p.m., Sarah made her most aggressive move yet. She approached Vanessa's desk with a thick folder and a satisfied smirk. "Mitchell, I need you to handle all of these filing tasks today. They're from several different cases, so make sure you don't mix anything up. Oh, and Mr. Hartwell wants them completed before you leave tonight, no matter how late that is." The folder contained at least 8 hours of work, far more than could reasonably be completed in half a day, especially with Vanessa's other responsibilities. It was a setup designed to create failure, giving Sarah ammunition to complain about missed deadlines and poor performance. "Is there a specific deadline for these individual projects?" Vanessa asked professionally. "Today. All of it. Today." Sarah's tone was sharp and dismissive. "And if you can't handle the workload, maybe that tells us something about your capabilities." The other employees pretended to focus on their own work, but Vanessa could feel them listening. Sarah was making a public statement about power and hierarchy, demonstrating that she could dump impossible tasks on Vanessa without consequence. What made the situation even more insulting was that several of the files contained work Vanessa had already completed weeks earlier. Sarah was literally giving her busy work, tasks that served no purpose except to humiliate and exhaust her. "I understand," Vanessa replied quietly. "I'll get started right away." Sarah's grin widened. She was clearly enjoying the power trip, reveling in her ability to make Vanessa's life miserable without any pushback or consequences. As Vanessa began sorting through the files, she noticed several of her colleagues watching, with expressions ranging from sympathy to amusement. Nobody offered to help, nobody questioned the fairness of the assignment, and nobody challenged Sarah's obvious abuse of authority. The isolation was complete. They had successfully positioned her as the office scapegoat, the weak link who deserved whatever treatment she received. In their minds, she had brought this on herself by refusing to know her place and accept their social hierarchy. What they didn't realize was that every insult, every impossible deadline, every moment of deliberate cruelty was being carefully cataloged in Vanessa's memory. She was building a comprehensive case against each of them, documenting their unprofessional behavior and creating a record that would soon prove invaluable. At 2 p.m., while pretending to research case law for one of Sarah's made-up assignments, Vanessa was actually reviewing the termination clauses in every employment contract at Hartwell & Associates. As the building's owner, she had access to all lease agreements and personnel files through her shell company's property management rights. Sarah Brennan's contract, she noted with satisfaction, included a morality clause that allowed for immediate termination in cases of workplace harassment or unprofessional conduct. Jennifer Walsh's position in accounting came with fiduciary responsibility requirements that made any form of workplace discrimination a fireable offense. Marcus Torres, Rebecca Stone, and even David Kim all had similar vulnerabilities in their employment agreements, clauses they had probably never read carefully, assuming they would never apply to them. By 4 p.m., Vanessa had completed her real work for the day. Her phone showed 3 missed calls from Diana at Apex Capital, probably wondering where she was for their board meeting. The irony wasn't lost on her. While Sarah Brennan was forcing her to file meaningless paperwork, Vanessa was missing a meeting where they would finalize the acquisition of 2 more commercial properties worth $15 million. But the timing was perfect. Tomorrow, she will make her move. Tonight, she would let them think they had won completely, let them believe their campaign had succeeded in breaking her spirit and destroying her position at the firm. As she worked through the stack of files, Vanessa allowed herself a small smile. In less than 24 hours, everything would change. The people who thought they held all the power would discover they had been playing a game where they never even knew the rules.
The best part was that they had done all the work for her. Every cruel comment, every impossible task, every moment of deliberate humiliation had been witnessed by other employees. When the truth finally came out, nobody would be able to claim they hadn't seen the harassment happening. Sarah Brennan and her followers had built the perfect case against themselves, and they had no idea what was coming. Wednesday morning brought an unusual energy to the Hartwell and Associates offices. Word had spread that senior partner Richard Hartwell himself would be conducting performance reviews for several employees, including some unexpected additions to the list. Sarah Brennan strutted through the office like a queen surveying her kingdom, convinced that her campaign against Vanessa had impressed management. "I heard Hartwell specifically requested to review Mitchell's file," she announced to her loyal followers during their morning gossip session. "Apparently, there have been multiple complaints about her work quality." Jennifer Walsh nodded knowingly. Well, when someone clearly isn't cut out for this level of professional environment, it shows. Management notices these things. What they didn't know was that Richard Hartwell had received a very different kind of call the night before. Diana Carver, acting on behalf of Apex Capital Management, had informed him that the building's ownership was requesting an immediate meeting to discuss lease violations and tenant conduct issues. Vanessa arrived at the office precisely on time, carrying the completed files from Sarah's impossible assignment. She had worked until midnight to finish everything perfectly, knowing that flawless work would make the eventual revelation even more devastating. "Morning, Mitchell," Marcus Torres called out with fake cheerfulness. "Ready for your big day? I heard you might have some important meetings." The mockery was obvious. They all knew she was being reviewed, and they assumed it would result in disciplinary action or termination. The anticipation of her downfall had energized the entire group. Around 10 a.m., Richard Hartwell's secretary, Mrs. Patterson, approached Vanessa's desk. Her expression was professionally neutral, giving no indication of what to expect. "Miss Mitchell, Mr. Hartwell would like to see you in the conference room on the 15th floor. Please bring any current case files you're working on." Sarah Brennan's head snapped up from her computer. The 15th floor? That's the executive level. They must be making this official. The 15th floor was indeed executive territory, reserved for senior partners and major client meetings. Most paralegals never set foot there unless they were being terminated or promoted, and everyone assumed they knew which category applied to Vanessa. As Vanessa gathered her files, she could feel eyes watching her from every corner of the office. The whispers started immediately, with colleagues speculating about how quickly she would be escorted out and whether security would be involved. "I almost feel bad for her," Rebecca Stone said loudly enough for Vanessa to hear. "But honestly, she brought this on herself. Some people just can't adapt to professional environments." David Kim, who had become increasingly bold in his harassment, added his own commentary. "Maybe this will be a learning experience. Help her understand her limitations." The elevator ride to the 15th floor felt like ascending to another world. The executive level featured marble floors, original artwork, and panoramic views of downtown Phoenix. Everything was designed to project power and success, the kind of environment where careers were made or destroyed with a single conversation. Mrs. Patterson led Vanessa to Conference Room A, the firm's most prestigious meeting space. Through the glassed walls, she could see Richard Hartwell sitting at the head of a massive mahogany table reviewing documents. But he wasn't alone. Two other figures sat at the table, a distinguished woman in an expensive suit, and a man Vanessa recognized but hoped others wouldn't. James Henderson, her business partner at Apex Capital, was maintaining his professional demeanor perfectly. "Miss Mitchell," Richard Hartwell stood as she entered. "Thank you for joining us. I'd like you to meet Diana Carver, representing our building's ownership group, and James Henderson from Apex Capital Management." Diana Carver was actually Vanessa's assistant, though she had never seen her in this context. Diana's transformation from behind-the-scenes support to corporate power player was impressive. She commanded the room with quiet authority. "Please have a seat," Diana said, her voice carrying the unmistakable tone of someone accustomed to being obeyed. Richard Hartwell looked uncomfortable, clearly unsure why a paralegal had been included in what he assumed was a high-level business meeting. I should mention that we're currently reviewing Miss Mitchell's performance. There have been some concerns raised by senior staff members.
Concerns? James Henderson opened his briefcase and removed a thick folder. That's interesting, because we've been conducting our own review of workplace conduct in this building. As representatives of the ownership group, we take tenant behavior very seriously. Diana leaned forward, her eyes fixed on Hartwell. Mr. Hartwell, are you aware that your lease agreement includes specific clauses about maintaining a professional work environment free from harassment and discrimination? Of course, Hartwell replied, though his confusion was evident. We pride ourselves on our professional standards. Then perhaps you can explain these documented incidents, James said, sliding a folder across the table. We've received multiple reports of systematic workplace harassment, impossible work assignments designed to create failure, and deliberate attempts to force an employee to resign through hostile work environment tactics. Hartwell's face went pale as he opened the folder. Inside were detailed records of every incident over the past 2 days, time-stamped accounts of Sarah's comments, copies of the impossible filing assignments, and even transcripts of conversations that had taken place in supposedly private areas. I don't understand, Hartwell stammered. How do you have this information? Diana smiled coldly. The building's security system is quite comprehensive. Audio and video surveillance in common areas is standard for liability protection. What's unusual is finding this level of coordinated harassment in a supposedly professional law firm. Vanessa sat silently, watching Richard Hartwell realize that his firm's reputation and lease were in jeopardy. The man who had built his career on reading people and situations was completely out of his depth. Furthermore, James continued, we've identified specific employees who appear to be ringleaders in this harassment campaign. Sarah Brennan, Jennifer Walsh, Marcus Torres, Rebecca Stone, and David Kim have all been documented engaging in unprofessional conduct that violates both your lease terms and basic workplace standards. Now wait a minute, Hartwell tried to regain control of the situation. These are valued employees. If there's been some misunderstanding… There's no misunderstanding, Diana interrupted. We have clear evidence of a hostile work environment. The question is whether you're going to address it appropriately or whether we need to consider lease termination for breach of conduct clauses. The threat was unmistakable. Hartwell and Associates would lose their prestigious downtown location and face public scandal if they didn't take immediate action. For a law firm, reputation was everything, and this kind of harassment lawsuit could destroy decades of carefully built credibility. What do you want me to do? Hartwell asked, his voice barely above a whisper. First, we want all harassment to stop immediately, James replied. Second, we want the responsible parties held accountable through your internal disciplinary procedures. Third, we want assurance that the targeted employee will be treated with respect and given opportunities for advancement. Hartwell looked at Vanessa with new eyes, seeing her not as a struggling paralegal, but as someone with powerful allies. He had no idea how powerful. Miss Mitchell, I want you to know that any harassment you've experienced is completely unacceptable. We'll be conducting immediate investigations and taking appropriate action. That's appreciated, Vanessa replied quietly. I just want to do my job without interference. Diana and James exchanged glances, and Vanessa knew they were about to reveal the next layer of her identity. But not yet. They would let Richard Hartwell make his disciplinary moves first, giving her tormentors enough rope to hang themselves even further. We'll be monitoring the situation closely, Diana warned. Any retaliation against Miss Mitchell or attempts to cover up past behavior will result in immediate lease termination and potential legal action. Understood completely, Hartwell nodded rapidly. You have my word that this will be handled appropriately. As the meeting concluded, Vanessa walked back toward the elevator with Diana and James. Once they were alone, Diana allowed herself a small smile. Phase 1 complete, she murmured. How do you want to handle the individual confrontations? Let them dig deeper, Vanessa replied. Sarah won't be able to resist escalating when she realizes I haven't been fired.
give her enough time to really commit to her position. James Henderson chuckled, "You're enjoying this more than I expected." 8 months of humiliation, Vanessa said, as the elevator doors closed. When Vanessa returned to the main office floor, she could immediately sense the confusion. She hadn't been escorted out by security. She hadn't been terminated. Instead, she was calmly returning to her desk with her files, looking exactly the same as when she left. Sarah Brennan's face barely contained panic. This wasn't how the script was supposed to play out. Jennifer Walsh and the others gathered around Sarah's desk, whispering urgently about what could have gone wrong with their carefully orchestrated plan. "Maybe they're just processing the paperwork," Rebecca Stone suggested hopefully. But Sarah knew better. Something had gone very wrong, and she could feel control of the situation slipping away. Instead of retreating and reassessing, she made the fatal mistake that Vanessa had been counting on. She decided to escalate. By Thursday afternoon, Sarah Brennan's desperation had reached dangerous levels. Her carefully orchestrated campaign to destroy Vanessa had not only failed, but seemed to have backfired spectacularly. Instead of being terminated, Vanessa appeared to have gained protection from somewhere high up the corporate ladder. Sarah's solution was to go nuclear. "I've been thinking about this all wrong," she announced to her diminishing circle of supporters during their afternoon break. Several colleagues who had previously enjoyed the harassment show were now keeping their distance, sensing that the winds had shifted.
Jennifer Walsh looked nervous. "Maybe we should just drop it, focus on our own work." "Drop it?" Sarah's voice rose to a dangerous pitch. "She's made us all look like fools. She's probably been recording our conversations, building some kind of case against us. We need to strike first." Marcus Torres, who had been unusually quiet since yesterday's meeting revelations, shook his head. "I don't know, Sarah. Something weird is going on. Hartwell looked scared when he called me into his office this morning." Richard Hartwell had indeed begun conducting damage control interviews with each employee mentioned in the surveillance reports. His conversations had been brief but pointed: cease all harassment immediately, maintain professionalism, and avoid any retaliation. The message was clear, even if the source of pressure remained mysterious. But Sarah interpreted these warnings as proof that Vanessa was gaining power, which only fueled her determination to destroy her rival once and for all. "I'm going to find out exactly what she's hiding," Sarah declared. "Nobody goes from being a nobody to having executive protection overnight. There's something she's not telling us, and I'm going to expose it." Rebecca Stone fidgeted with her coffee cup. "How are you going to do that?" Sarah's smile was predatory. "I'm going to follow her, see where she goes, who she talks to. People like her always have secrets, and secrets can be used." What Sarah didn't realize was that her plan to stalk Vanessa would lead her directly into the most humiliating revelation of her career. That evening, Vanessa left the office at exactly 6 p.m., the same time she always did. She had noticed Sarah lingering near the elevators, pretending to organize files while clearly waiting for something. The amateur surveillance was almost insulting in its obviousness. Vanessa drove her modest Honda Civic through downtown Phoenix traffic, checking her mirrors occasionally to confirm that Sarah's silver BMW was following 3 cars behind. She had to admire Sarah's persistence, even if her execution was terrible. Instead of heading to her apartment, Vanessa drove to the Ritz-Carlton Phoenix, one of the city's most exclusive hotels. She pulled into valet parking and handed her keys to the attendant, who greeted her by name with obvious familiarity. "Good evening, Miss Mitchell. Will you be joining Mr. Henderson in the penthouse suite this evening?" "Yes, thank you, Carlos. The usual table for 3. Sarah parked across the street, watching through binoculars she had borrowed from her ex-boyfriend's hunting gear. A paralegal meeting someone at the Ritz-Carlton was already suspicious, but the penthouse suite suggested something far more significant than she had imagined. Vanessa took the private elevator to the 42nd floor, where James Henderson was waiting with champagne and a spectacular view of the city lights. The penthouse suite was actually owned by Apex Capital Management, used for entertaining high-value clients and conducting confidential business meetings. How did our little stalker handle the Ritz-Carlton revelation? James asked with amusement. She's probably calling everyone she knows, trying to figure out who I'm meeting and why, Vanessa replied, accepting a glass of Dom Perignon. Give her about an hour to work up the courage to investigate further. Diana Carver joined them from the suite's office area, where she had been finalizing documents for tomorrow's big reveal. The papers are ready: Hartwell & Associates lease transfer, the employment contract modifications, and the termination letters for our problem employees. Speaking of which, James said, Sarah Brennan just entered the hotel lobby. Hotel security is tracking her movements. Through the suite's floor-to-ceiling windows, they could see Sarah's BMW still parked across the street. She had clearly worked up the nerve to follow Vanessa inside, though she had no idea what she was walking into. In the lobby, Sarah approached the concierge desk with false confidence. "Excuse me, I'm supposed to meet Miss Mitchell, but I'm not sure which room she's in." The concierge, trained to protect guest privacy, smiled politely. "I'm sorry, but I can't provide room information without proper identification and confirmation from the guest." Sarah's frustration was obvious. "This is important business. I work with her at Hartwell & Associates." "I understand, but hotel policy is quite strict. Perhaps you could call Miss Mitchell directly." Sarah's face reddened. She was so close to uncovering Vanessa's secret, but hotel security protocols were blocking her investigation. In her desperation, she made another crucial mistake. "Look, I think she might be involved in something illegal. Meeting with people, taking money. I just need to know who she's with up there." The concierge's expression hardened. Accusations of illegal activity were taken very seriously at the Ritz-Carlton, and Sarah's behavior was becoming increasingly erratic. "Ma'am, I'm going to have to ask you to leave. If you have genuine concerns about illegal activity, you should contact the police." "I'm not leaving until I get answers." Sarah's voice echoed through the elegant lobby, drawing stares from other guests. Hotel security arrived within minutes, professional and polite, but firm in their insistence that Sarah leave the premises immediately. Her protests and accusations only made her removal more embarrassing, with several guests recording the scene on their phones. 42 floors above, Vanessa watched the lobby drama through the hotel security monitor system, which was accessible through the penthouse suite's business center. "She's really committed to this investigation," Diana observed, "even when it's destroying her credibility." "Tomorrow's going to be interesting," James said, refilling their champagne glasses. "She'll probably spend all night trying to figure out what she witnessed here."
Let her, Vanessa replied. "The more desperate she becomes, the more she'll overplay her hand when the truth comes out." Friday morning arrived with an electric tension in the Hartwell & Associates offices. Sarah had indeed spent the night researching, calling contacts, and building what she believed was a case against Vanessa. She had convinced herself that catching Vanessa at the Ritz-Carlton was proof of some kind of corruption or illegal activity. "I know what she's doing," Sarah announced to anyone who would listen. "She's selling information, taking bribes, something. Nobody goes from a strip mall paralegal to penthouse meetings overnight without doing something dirty." Jennifer Walsh looked uncomfortable with the increasingly wild theories. "Sarah, maybe you should be careful about making accusations without proof." "I have proof." Sarah pulled out her phone, showing blurry photos of Vanessa entering the hotel. "She's meeting with people, taking money, probably stealing client information to sell to competitors." The accusations were serious enough that they couldn't be ignored, but wild enough that they made Sarah look increasingly unstable. Other employees began to distance themselves, sensing that her obsession with Vanessa had crossed into dangerous territory. At 10 a.m., Richard Hartwell's secretary made an announcement that sent shockwaves through the office. "All staff members are required to attend a mandatory meeting in the main conference room at 11 a.m. This includes partners, associates, paralegals, and support staff. Attendance is not optional." The tone was ominous, suggesting major changes or serious disciplinary actions. Sarah convinced herself that this was her moment of vindication. Vanessa would finally be exposed and terminated for whatever illegal activities she had uncovered. "This is it," she whispered to the few remaining members of her faction. "They're going to arrest her right here in front of everyone." What Sarah didn't realize was that she was absolutely right about one thing. Someone was about to be exposed in front of the entire firm. She had just identified the wrong person. As employees filed into the conference room, Vanessa took her usual seat in the back corner, maintaining the same modest demeanor she had projected for 8 months. But today, everything would change. Richard Hartwell entered the room, followed by Diana Carver, James Henderson, and 2 other individuals that most employees didn't recognize. The presence of outsiders at an internal meeting was unprecedented and deeply unsettling. "Thank you all for coming," Hartwell began, his voice strained with barely controlled stress. "We have some important announcements about changes in our firm's structure and ownership." Sarah Brennan leaned forward in her chair, ready to witness Vanessa's downfall and claim credit for exposing whatever corruption had brought these investigators to their office. She had no idea that she was about to witness the most spectacular reversal of fortune in Hartwell and Associates' corporate history. The conference room had never felt smaller. 63 employees sat in uncomfortable silence, watching Richard Hartwell's face cycle through various shades of pale as he shuffled papers at the head of the table. Diana Carver and James Henderson flanked him like corporate executioners, their expressions professionally neutral but unmistakably powerful. Sarah Brennan sat in the front row, practically vibrating with anticipation. She had positioned herself for the best view of what she assumed would be Vanessa's public humiliation and arrest. Her phone was ready, her vindication finally at hand. "Before we begin," Hartwell said, his voice cracking slightly, "I want to introduce our guests. Diana Carver represents Meridian Holdings, the investment group that owns this building. James Henderson is from Apex Capital Management, our new partners in several business ventures." The word partners hung in the air with ominous weight. In the legal world, unexpected partnerships usually meant financial trouble, hostile takeovers, or regulatory investigations. Jennifer Walsh whispered to Rebecca Stone, "Do you think we're being sold?" Marcus Torres, who had been unusually quiet all morning, stared at his hands. His conversation with Hartwell yesterday had included warnings about career-ending misconduct that suddenly felt more threatening than he had realized. "Over the past week," Hartwell continued, "serious concerns have been raised about workplace conduct within our firm. These concerns have been documented, investigated, and verified through multiple sources, including security footage and recorded conversations." Sarah's confidence faltered slightly. This wasn't the script she had expected. Where were the fraud investigators? Where were the police officers coming to arrest Vanessa for selling client information? Diana Carver stood, commanding the room with quiet authority. "As representatives of the building's ownership, we take tenant conduct very seriously. What we discovered here goes beyond simple workplace disagreements. We found evidence of systematic harassment, deliberate sabotage, and coordinated efforts to create a hostile work environment." She clicked a remote, and the conference room's projection screen came to life. Security camera footage filled the screen, crystal clear audio and video of Sarah's harassment campaign from the past 2 weeks. The first clip showed Sarah loudly discussing Vanessa's embarrassing car while others listened. The second showed Jennifer Walsh making comments about Vanessa's clothing and background. The third captured Marcus Torres deliberately spilling coffee and watching Vanessa clean it up. "Oh my God," someone whispered from the back of the room. Sarah's face had gone chalk white. "Wait, that's taken out of context. We were just—" "You were just what?" James Henderson's voice cut through her protest like a blade. "Just destroying a colleague's professional reputation for your own entertainment?" More footage played. Sarah assigning impossible workloads, David Kim piling on with fake criticisms, Rebecca Stone openly discussing how to force Vanessa to quit. Every cruel moment, every deliberate insult, every calculated attack was captured in high definition. The room sat in stunned silence. Employees who had witnessed the harassment looked uncomfortable, realizing they were also on camera doing nothing to intervene. Those who had participated looked terrified. This behavior violates not only basic human decency, but also your employment contracts, our lease agreements, and several state and federal workplace protection laws, Diana continued. The question is how to address it appropriately. Richard Hartwell cleared his throat weakly. We've identified the primary instigators and will be taking appropriate disciplinary action. Actually, James Henderson interrupted, there's been a development that changes our approach to this situation. He nodded to Diana, who clicked the remote again. The screen now showed a corporate organizational chart that made several people gasp audibly. At the top was Apex Capital Management. Below that, Meridian Holdings. Below that, Phoenix Commercial Properties. And at the bottom, highlighted in bright red, was the Hartwell and Associates building lease. It seems, James said with a slight smile, that we need to discuss the chain of ownership that governs this building and, by extension, your employment here. Sarah stared at the chart, her investigative journalist fantasies crumbling. This wasn't about Vanessa being corrupt. This was about powerful people taking an interest in what happened to her. But the real shock was yet to come. Diana clicked the remote one final time, and a new slide appeared. It showed the complete corporate structure of Apex Capital Management, including its board of directors and primary shareholders. Listed as chairman and CEO was a name that made the entire room go silent. V. Mitchell. Vanessa Mitchell. The silence stretched for what felt like hours, but was probably only seconds. Sarah Brennan's mouth opened and closed like a fish gasping for air. Jennifer Walsh actually dropped her coffee cup, the crash echoing through the dead quiet room. Ladies and gentlemen, James Henderson said with obvious satisfaction, I'd like you to meet the actual owner of Apex Capital Management, Meridian Holdings, Phoenix Commercial Properties, and, by extension, this building and your jobs, Miss Vanessa Mitchell. Vanessa stood slowly from her corner seat, her demeanor completely unchanged. She still wore the same modest outfit, the same simple appearance that had fooled them all for 8 months. But now everyone could see what she had been hiding behind her carefully constructed facade. Some of you may be wondering, Vanessa said, her voice calm and professional, why someone who owns a $40 million investment portfolio would work as a paralegal in her own building. The number hit the room like a physical blow. $40 million. The woman they had mocked for driving an old Honda, criticized for her clothes, and treated like a disposable nobody was worth more than most of them would earn in their entire careers. 8 months ago, I acquired this property through Phoenix Commercial Holdings. I wanted to understand how the business operated, how the employees interacted, and whether this firm was the kind of tenant we wanted in our premier downtown location. Sarah Brennan finally found her voice, though it came out as a strangled whisper. That's impossible. You're just a paralegal. You have a community college certificate. Vanessa smiled for the first time in months, and it was not a friendly expression. Actually, I have an MBA from Stanford and a law degree from Northwestern. The resume you saw was carefully constructed to help me blend in and observe workplace dynamics without influencing behavior through wealth or status. She walked to the front of the room, her presence somehow completely different now that the truth was revealed. Every step seemed to command more respect, more attention, more fear from the people who had spent months treating her as insignificant. What I discovered, she continued, was a toxic workplace culture that violated both legal standards and basic human decency. Sarah Brennan, you organized a systematic harassment campaign designed to force me to quit. You created impossible work assignments, spread false information about my performance, and encouraged others to join in psychological abuse. Sarah tried to interrupt, but Vanessa's raised hand silenced her immediately.
Jennifer Walsh, you participated in personal attacks on my appearance and background. Marcus Torres, you created deliberately hostile conditions and took pleasure in watching me struggle with sabotage you created. Rebecca Stone, you openly strategized about ways to make my job unbearable. David Kim, you abandoned professionalism to join in harassment when you thought it would advance your career. Each name was delivered like a judge reading a verdict. The accused employees seemed to shrink in their chairs, finally understanding the magnitude of their mistakes. Here's what happens next, Vanessa continued. Sarah Brennan, Jennifer Walsh, Marcus Torres, Rebecca Stone, and David Kim, you are terminated, effective immediately. Security will escort you from the building, and your personal items will be mailed to you. You will not be allowed to return to this property for any reason. The terminations landed like bombs. Sarah Brennan actually stood up, her chair falling backward. You can't do this. This is retaliation. I'll sue for wrongful termination. Vanessa's laugh was cold and utterly without humor. You'll sue me? With what lawyer? Because the attorney you'd need to hire to have any chance against my legal team costs more per hour than you make in a week. And that's assuming you could find someone willing to take a case with this much documented evidence of your misconduct. The reality of the situation finally hit Sarah with full force. She hadn't just lost a job, she had declared war on someone who owned the battlefield, commanded the armies, and had spent 8 months documenting every battle. Furthermore, Vanessa continued, your terminations include non-compete clauses that prevents you from working for any law firm in the Phoenix metropolitan area for 2 years. Violation of these clauses will result in immediate legal action for breach of contract.
The comprehensive nature of their destruction was becoming clear. They weren't just fired, they were professionally exiled from their chosen career field in their home city. But Vanessa wasn't finished. The silence in the conference room was deafening as Vanessa continued to dismantle the lives of her former tormentors with surgical precision. Sarah Brennan stood frozen behind her overturned chair, her face cycling through emotions faster than anyone could track: shock, denial, rage, and finally a creeping terror as the full scope of her situation became clear. Additionally, Vanessa said, her voice carrying the weight of absolute authority, I've instructed Diana to file formal complaints with the Arizona State Bar regarding the conduct of licensed attorneys who participated in or enabled this harassment campaign. David Kim, who had recently passed the bar exam and was working toward full associate status, went pale. A state bar complaint could destroy his legal career before it truly began, making his law degree worthless and his student loans a lifetime burden with no hope of the income needed to repay them. That's not fair, he stammered. I was just trying to fit in. I didn't know. You didn't know what? Vanessa interrupted. That deliberately humiliating a colleague was wrong? That creating false performance evaluations was unethical? That joining a harassment campaign to advance your own position violated every principle of professional conduct you swore to uphold when you took the bar exam? David's career prospects weren't just damaged, they were obliterated. No law firm would hire an attorney with state bar sanctions for workplace harassment, and the legal community in Phoenix was tight-knit enough that word would spread quickly. But Vanessa's revenge extended far beyond professional consequences. Sarah, I believe you mentioned last week that you were closing on a house next month, that lovely place in Scottsdale with the pool and the mountain views. Sarah's blood turned to ice. Her mortgage application was pending, dependent on her employment verification and salary confirmation from Hartwell and Associates. Without her job, the loan would be immediately canceled, and she'd lose both the house and her substantial earnest money deposit. How do you know about my house? She whispered. I know everything about all of you, Vanessa replied matter-of-factly. Jennifer, your daughter starts at Arizona State in the fall, doesn't she? Quite expensive without that tuition assistance program you qualified for through Hartwell's educational benefits. Jennifer Walsh's face crumpled. She was a single mother who had been counting on the firm's tuition assistance to help her daughter avoid crushing student loans.
Without that benefit, her daughter might have to abandon her college plans entirely. Marcus, I understand you've been supporting your elderly parents' assisted living costs through payroll deduction. That's going to be challenging without a paycheck. Marcus Torres had indeed been using the firm's elder care assistance program to help his parents maintain their dignity in their final years. The financial pressure of covering those costs independently would force impossible choices between his parents' care and his own family survival. Rebecca, your husband's medical expenses from his cancer treatment have been covered through our premium insurance plan. I hope his oncologist accepts patients with basic state coverage. Rebecca Stone began to cry. Her husband was in the middle of an experimental treatment protocol that had shown promising results. Losing premium insurance coverage could mean losing access to treatments that might save his life. The systematic destruction of their financial security was breathtaking in its completeness. Vanessa hadn't just fired them, she had identified and targeted every aspect of their lives that depended on their employment with surgical accuracy. "This is cruel," Jennifer Walsh said through her tears. "We made mistakes, but this is destroying our families." "Cruel?" Vanessa's eyebrows raised in genuine surprise. "You spent 8 months trying to destroy my career, my reputation, and my mental health for your own entertainment. You took pleasure in making me feel worthless and powerless. You celebrated what you thought was my humiliation." She walked closer to the group of terminated employees, her presence somehow more intimidating now that her true nature was revealed. "The difference is that your cruelty was based on perceived weakness. My response is based on documented facts and legitimate business consequences. You violated workplace policies, created legal liability, and demonstrated character flaws that make you unsuitable for professional environments." Richard Hartwell, who had been watching the destruction of his employees with growing horror, finally found his voice. "Miss Mitchell, surely there's some way to handle this that doesn't ruin these people's lives completely." Vanessa turned to him with an expression that made him immediately regret speaking. "Mr. Hartwell, are you suggesting that documented workplace harassment should be overlooked? That employees who create hostile work environments deserve protection from the consequences of their actions?" "No, of course not, but..." "Because if that's your position, it raises serious questions about your firm's fitness to continue operating in this building. Tenants who don't take workplace harassment seriously might find themselves looking for new accommodations." The threat was unmistakable. Hartwell and Associates' lease was entirely at Vanessa's discretion, and she had just demonstrated that she was willing to use that power without hesitation. "Furthermore," Diana Carver interjected, speaking for the first time since the revelations began, "we've discovered some interesting inconsistencies in your firm's billing practices that require investigation." This was a new bombshell. James Henderson opened another folder and spread documents across the conference table. It appears that several clients were charged for premium paralegal services while receiving work from entry-level staff. The billing rates claimed expertise that wasn't delivered. Richard Hartwell's face went from pale to gray. Billing fraud was a career-ending offense for lawyers, potentially resulting in disbarment, criminal charges, and massive malpractice liability. These billing irregularities coincide with the period when certain staff members were sabotaging Miss Mitchell's work while claiming credit for projects she completed, James continued. It raises questions about whether the harassment was motivated by a desire to cover up fraudulent billing practices. Sarah Brennan finally understood the true scope of the trap she had walked into. This wasn't just about workplace harassment anymore. Vanessa had uncovered financial irregularities that could result in criminal prosecution for fraud. We didn't know about any billing fraud," Sarah protested desperately. "Really?" Vanessa pulled out her own folder, thick with documents that she had been secretly compiling for months. "Because I have emails where you specifically requested that your name be added to projects you didn't work on, timesheets where you claimed credit for research I completed, client communications where you represented yourself as the primary paralegal on cases you barely touched." The evidence was overwhelming and undeniable. Sarah had indeed been inflating her contributions to justify higher billing rates, a practice that constituted fraud when it resulted in clients being charged for services they didn't receive. Everyone else who participated in the harassment campaign has similar documentation, Vanessa continued: false timesheets, inflated contributions, and attempts to claim credit for work performed by the person they were simultaneously trying to force out of the firm.
The remaining employees in the conference room began to understand that they weren't just witnessing terminations. They were watching the unraveling of a systematic fraud scheme that could result in criminal charges for everyone involved. "Here's what's going to happen next," Vanessa announced. "Those of you being terminated have exactly 1 hour to clean out your desks under security supervision. Any attempt to take client files, contact lists, or proprietary information will result in immediate prosecution for theft." She turned to address the rest of the room. "For those of you who remain, understand that this firm is under new management effective immediately. Diana Carver will be overseeing operations while we determine whether Hartwell & Associates can be salvaged or whether a complete restructuring is necessary." The power shift was complete. In less than an hour, Vanessa had transformed from victim to owner, from powerless employee to absolute authority over everyone who had tormented her. "One final thing," she said, her voice carrying a note of personal satisfaction. "Sarah, you asked me to know my place. I do know my place. My place is at the top of the corporate hierarchy, deciding the professional fate of people who mistake kindness for weakness." Sarah Brennan's legs finally gave out, and she collapsed back into her overturned chair. The magnitude of her miscalculation was beyond comprehension. She had declared war on someone who owned the entire battlefield and had spent 8 months gathering ammunition. As security guards entered the conference room to escort the terminated employees out, Vanessa allowed herself a small smile. Justice, she had learned, was indeed sweet, especially when it was served with perfect documentation and unlimited resources. But her revenge was not quite complete. 6 months later, Phoenix's legal community was still buzzing about the spectacular downfall that had become known as the Hartwell incident. What had started as workplace harassment had unraveled into the most comprehensive corporate takedown anyone could remember, with consequences that continued to ripple through the city's professional circles. Sarah Brennan sat in the cramped waiting room of a discount legal clinic, clutching a folder of documents that represented her desperate attempt to fight back against the systematic destruction of her life. The clinic's fluorescent lights flickered overhead, casting harsh shadows that matched her circumstances perfectly. "Miss Brennan?" A tired-looking attorney emerged from a back office. "I've reviewed your case, and I have to be honest with you." Sarah's heart sank before he even continued. This was the 7th lawyer she had consulted, and she could already read the rejection in his expression. "The evidence against you is overwhelming. Documented harassment, billing fraud, breach of professional conduct, and all of it backed by security footage and recorded conversations. No attorney in their right mind would take this case against Vanessa Mitchell's legal team." The lawyer's words confirmed what Sarah had slowly come to realize over the past months. Vanessa hadn't just destroyed her current situation, she had made her legally untouchable. Every piece of evidence, every document, every recording had been gathered with meticulous precision by someone who understood exactly how to build an airtight case. "But there has to be something," Sarah pleaded, "some kind of violation, some technicality we can use." "Ma'am, she owns the building. She had every legal right to monitor workplace conduct. She documented genuine harassment and fraud. Even if we could find a procedural error, you'd be fighting someone with unlimited resources and perfect documentation. It would bankrupt you just to file the papers." Sarah left the clinic with no hope and no options. Her savings were depleted, her credit destroyed, her reputation in ruins. The house in Scottsdale was gone, the mortgage company had kept her earnest money, and she was now living in a studio apartment that cost more than half her unemployment benefits. But Sarah's story was just one thread in a tapestry of consequences that Vanessa had woven with masterful precision.
Jennifer Walsh had been forced to withdraw her daughter from Arizona State University after losing the tuition assistance benefits. The girl now worked at a retail store, her college dreams indefinitely postponed, while Jennifer struggled to find employment that didn't require references from her previous legal career. Marcus Torres had moved his elderly parents into his own home after losing the assisted living payments, crowding his family of 4 into a space barely suitable for 2. The stress had triggered health problems for both his parents and marriage problems with his wife, who hadn't signed up to be a full-time caregiver while dealing with their own financial crisis. Rebecca Stone's husband had been forced to discontinue his experimental cancer treatment when they lost their premium insurance. He was now receiving basic palliative care through state programs, and Rebecca worked 3 part-time jobs to cover medical expenses that their previous insurance would have handled easily. David Kim had been officially sanctioned by the Arizona State Bar, making him unemployable in any legal capacity. His law degree was worthless, his student loans were in default, and he was working night shifts at a warehouse while living in his parents' basement at age 28. But the most spectacular consequence wasn't individual, it was systemic. Richard Hartwell himself had been forced to surrender his law license after the billing fraud investigation revealed years of systematic overbilling and client account mismanagement. Hartwell and Associates had collapsed entirely, with remaining staff scrambling to find positions at other firms while dealing with the stigma of association with the scandal. The building that had once housed the prestigious law firm now stood partially empty, with Vanessa deliberately keeping several floors vacant as a reminder of what happened to tenants who created toxic workplace environments. On a bright Tuesday morning in June, Vanessa stood in the penthouse office that had once been Richard Hartwell's private domain. The space had been completely renovated and now served as the headquarters for her expanded business empire. Through floor-to-ceiling windows, she could see the entire city of Phoenix spread out below her, like a kingdom she had conquered through patience and intelligence rather than force. Diana Carver entered with her morning briefing, a ritual that had become both more elaborate and more satisfying since their victory at Hartwell and Associates. "The Peterson merger is finalized," Diana reported. Apex Capital now controls 3 of the city's 5 largest commercial properties. Net worth has increased to $67 million since the Hartwell acquisition. Vanessa nodded, but the financial success wasn't what satisfied her most. The numbers were just a way of keeping score in a game she had mastered long before her enemies even realized they were playing. "What about our former colleagues?" she asked. Sarah Brennan was rejected for another paralegal position yesterday, the 7th rejection this month. Her application was flagged by our industry contacts as soon as she submitted it. Vanessa had been thorough in her professional exile of her former tormentors. Discreet conversations with hiring managers, carefully worded references to documented misconduct, and the natural tendency of the legal community to avoid anyone associated with major scandals had made them effectively unemployable in their chosen field.
Jennifer Walsh applied for a position with Patterson and Williams, Diana continued, naming the budget firm Marcus Torres had once suggested as more appropriate for Vanessa's skill level. They declined to interview her after checking her references. The irony was perfect. The firm that had been suggested as a step down for Vanessa was now too prestigious for the people who had tried to force her out of the legal profession entirely. Marcus Torres filed for bankruptcy last week. Rebecca Stone's husband passed away last month. The memorial service had 12 attendees. Vanessa felt a moment of genuine sadness about Rebecca's husband. Cancer was a cruel enemy that didn't discriminate based on character flaws. But Rebecca had chosen to participate in harassment campaigns while her husband fought for his life, prioritizing workplace cruelty over basic human decency. And David Kim? Still working warehouse shifts. His parents are pressuring him to move out, but he can't afford his own place on minimum wage. His law school classmates have stopped returning his calls. The systematic nature of their social and professional destruction was more complete than Vanessa had originally planned. She had intended to fire them and move on, but their attempts to fight back legally had forced her to demonstrate the full extent of her power and resources. "There's one more update," Diana said with barely concealed satisfaction.
Sarah Brennan was spotted yesterday applying for a job at a coffee shop near the university, the same chain where she used to complain about having to get coffee for actual professionals. The poetry of that particular consequence was almost too perfect. Sarah, who had mocked Vanessa for being beneath real professionals, was now serving coffee to college students while her former victim controlled millions of dollars in commercial real estate. James Henderson joined them from the adjoining office, carrying documents for their afternoon acquisitions meeting. The Scottsdale property deal is ready for your signature. Ironically, it's the same development where Sarah Brennan was supposed to buy her dream house. Vanessa would now own the entire residential complex that Sarah had once hoped to call home, not through spite, but because it was a sound investment that happened to carry symbolic significance. You know, James said thoughtfully, most people would have just quit and found another job when faced with that level of harassment. Most people don't have the resources to turn workplace bullying into a comprehensive business case study, Vanessa replied. But more importantly, most people don't understand that true power isn't about domination, it's about having options. She turned back to the window, watching the city conduct its daily business far below. Those people tried to make me feel powerless because they assumed I was powerless. They confused kindness with weakness, patience with vulnerability. Their mistake was fundamental. They judged my worth based on what they could see, never considering what I might be choosing not to reveal. Diana and James exchanged glances. In the month since the Hartwell revelation, they had watched Vanessa evolve from their cautious business partner into someone who understood power at levels most people never imagined. The most satisfying part, Vanessa continued, isn't the financial success or even the professional revenge. It's knowing that they destroyed themselves. Every cruel comment, every impossible deadline, every moment of deliberate humiliation was their choice. I simply documented their behavior and let natural consequences play out. As if summoned by their conversation, Vanessa's phone buzzed with a news alert. Former Hartwell and Associates paralegal Sarah Brennan arrested for public intoxication and disturbing the peace outside Phoenix law firms. The alert included a photo of Sarah being led away in handcuffs, her face puffy with alcohol and rage, outside the offices of Morrison and Associates, another prestigious firm that had rejected her application. The final degradation was complete. Sarah Brennan, who had once controlled the social dynamics of a prestigious law firm through fear and intimidation, was now a public spectacle of professional and personal collapse. Vanessa felt no joy in Sarah's arrest, only a sense of completion. Justice wasn't always about punishment. Sometimes it was simply about letting people reveal their true character when they thought nobody important was watching. Schedule a meeting with the Phoenix Bar Association, she told Diana. I want to establish a foundation for workplace harassment prevention, full funding, professional training programs, and support systems for employees who experience hostile work environments. It was the perfect final move. Vanessa would transform her experience into systematic change that would protect other people from suffering the harassment she had endured. Her revenge had evolved into reform, her personal justice into institutional improvement. As the sun set over Phoenix, casting long shadows across the city she had conquered through patience and intelligence, Vanessa Mitchell smiled. She had learned the most important lesson of all. True power wasn't about crushing enemies, it was about building something better from the ruins they created themselves. 8 months of harassment had cost their tormentors everything they valued. 8 months of careful planning had given her everything she wanted. Sometimes the best revenge wasn't getting mad, it was getting everything. Looking for more? We've got 2 amazing stories ready for you right on screen. If this one touched you, these are absolutely worth your time. Click to watch them now. And hey, subscribe and hit that bell to never miss our latest uploads.